Mr. Mahbubani, thank you very much for this interview. We are living through interesting times. The United States and China just agreed on a phase one deal for their trade war. But we tend to live with the day-to-day news and forget the reasons behind that. So I'd like to hear your view on why did we reach this stage? What is the reason for this trade war, do you think?
Well, this is much more than a trade war. There's a sort of a 2,000-year logic in world history which tells us that when the world's number one emerging power, which today is China, is about to become bigger than the world's number one power, which today is the United States of America, then quite naturally tensions rise between the number one and the number two. So the trade war is only one small dimension of a much larger geopolitical contest, which I'm documenting in my next book, Has China Won?
When you say that, does that mean that this is just an episode in an ongoing Cold War?
The trade war is only one dimension of a multi-dimensional struggle between United States and China. It's in trade, it's in technology, could be in the military dimension, and in the cultural dimension. But it will not be a Cold War. Because in the old Cold War, there was virtually no trade, no cross-investment between the United States and the Soviet Union. By contrast, the amount of trade and investment links between the United States and China are phenomenal. So it's not going to be easy to break up that very large relationship between the two.
Going back to the more newsy stuff, now that we concluded that phase one of the trade deal, do you think that phase two is going to be easy? Do you think that this is going to end well?
Well, I think no one can predict the outcome of this contest because there are many factors at play. In theory, it should be about trade and economics, but as you know, there'll be the American presidential elections in 2020. And one thing I can guarantee you is that there'll be a lot of China bashing in 2020 during the American presidential elections. And in that kind of climate, it'd be very difficult for President Trump to appear to be soft on China. So he said this initial trade deal is wonderful. I think it's good in the sense that a ceasefire helps to calm the waters. But a lot of the tariffs that he's imposed on China haven't gone away. And I think the Chinese are psychologically ready for a very long struggle in this dimension.
What if a Democrat wins the US elections? And even before that, what if a leftist Democrat wins the primary and is representing the Democrats? Do you think that there might be a change or a shift in policy? Or do you think that this is so fundamental for the United States that it's not reliant on who is the president of the US?
Well, as you know, President Trump is attacked by the Democrats for everything he does. Everything he does, they attack him. But when he attacks China, they say, we support you. So it's the only area where there's bipartisan support. So clearly, whether a Democrat comes or a Republican comes back, the US-China geopolitical contest is driven by deeper factors and will carry on. But at the same time, if you do have some kind of mainstream figure, someone like Bill Clinton or Barack Obama or Joe Biden become the president, then I suspect the geopolitical contest will continue, but it won't be as chaotic as what we have seen under Donald Trump.
Who do you think will win this war?
I think the question is whether or not you are asking the question from a short-term time frame or a long-term time frame. So in the short term, it's conceivable the United States can say, we won, we got China to buy more goods from us. But this is not a short-term game. This is not a sprint. This is a marathon. And from the Chinese point of view, any concessions they make in the short term buys them time. And with that time, they'll continue to grow. And as they continue to grow, eventually the economy will become bigger. than the United States of America. Now, most Americans cannot even conceive of the possibility that China could become bigger than America, but they forget that from the year 1 to the year 1820, the two largest economies of the world were always those of China and India. So in the 21st century, we're going back to now again a 2,000-year norm. So it's perfectly natural to see the return of China and India. And so the Americans psychologically have to make major adjustments and focus on the long term and not the short term game.
Going back to 2020, there have been many op-eds in American publications arguing that the United States does not have any strategic interest in the Middle East region anymore because it's reaching self-sufficiency in terms of energy, and that the Middle Eastern oil is more vital to China and the EU, and this is why China and the rest of the world need to step up in terms of security concerns and securing oil flows from the region rather than the United States. What is your view on that?
Well, I think the Middle East region should psychologically prepare itself for the fact that the United States is now going to focus on its number one challenger, which is China. And President Obama already gave a hint of that. You may recall he spoke about the pivot to Asia. And so there is now a very deep consensus in the American security establishment. And as a defense secretary once said, it's about China, China, China. So if it's about China, 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 the Middle East is a distraction. And I think the Middle East has got to be psychologically prepared for time to come when the American administration will say, I'm sorry, I have to focus on my priorities. Middle East is a distraction and I'm leaving. And by the way, if Singapore has experienced this because we used to be protected by the British and we thought the British would stay in Asia forever. Then the British economy got into troubles and the British left. So this is normal when empires go through a phase of declining not in absolute terms, in relative terms, then clearly they will have to make strategic adjustments. So the Middle East should psychologically prepare itself to deal with a world in which the United States is no longer the dominant player in the region.
What about China's interest in the Middle East?
The Chinese have a very, very different strategic worldview from the Americans. The Americans believe that their role as a global superpower is to project their power in all corners of the world. The Chinese think this is a waste of money. The Chinese priority is to take care of the interests of the 1.4 billion Chinese people. And China is still a developing country. Its per capita income is only 10,000 compared to 60,000 for United States of America.
But they need the oil from the Middle East.
I think the Chinese have discovered that the best way to get oil is to pay for it. And money is much more powerful than an aircraft carrier in getting the energy that you need. It's a matter of pricing. And if you factor in the costs of stationing an aircraft carrier in the Gulf, which is like, millions of dollars a day, you're adding that to the cost of the oil you buy. So the Chinese will say, instead of putting the money in the aircraft carrier, I'll give more money to the seller. And so it's a matter of pricing. And the Chinese, I think, have, of course, hedged their bets. And they will diversify their energy supplies. But if they can get good supplies in the Middle East, they will continue to do so.
Thank you very much for this very interesting conversation, Mr. Mahbubani.